Please welcome them to the stage. Put your hands together for Stefan and Gary.
Thank you. Thanks. So, good afternoon. I'm delighted to introduce Stefan Van Engen, who is the Vice President of Content Programming and Partnerships at Xumo, who arrived from the US this morning. I think it's fair to say that Xumo was one of the first apps to market, and for a number of years was the app powering the LG channels in FAST. Xumo is now part of two of the biggest cable companies in the States, Comcast and Charter Communications, and is bringing together the world of FAST and pay TV. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm at All3Media International, so we have 3 channels with Stefan. Midsummer Murders channel, our Gardening with Monty Don channel, but then we also have our Fifth Gear channel, and that's interesting because that opens up another part of Stefan's business, which is Xumo Enterprise, so we'll talk a little bit about that. But I mean, we've only got 15 minutes. Why don't we just start by rewinding a little bit, and maybe you could take us through the FAST journey so far for Xumo.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Xumo started a long time ago in this world, and I joined as the first content executive back when we were independently owned and launched commercially in end of 2015, 2016 with fast channels. And back then in the US, all of the studios, all of the networks, all of the broadcasters were guarding that content with their life for pay services, for SVOD services. And the idea of giving up content for ad-supported free streaming was hard to convince people. And so what you ended up with in the early days in the content world of FAST was a lot of short-form content, a lot of social content. The social platforms at the time were starting to change algorithms, so it was harder to monetize on Facebook and YouTube, and so people were looking at what else to do with these libraries of short form and social content, and thus born Xumo. We developed tool sets to stitch together and originate linear channels with the ad breaks and dynamically served advertising, and we put the application together for linear. Skip ahead a few years and everybody's jumping in.
Yeah.
And the evolution has gone from sort of short form social content to digital first properties to people with channels that I call bucket of stuff channels. I've got a bucket of stuff, let's make a channel and monetize it, to now broadcast worthy channels. And you see the content that's coming out of FAST in the US. The largest partners are the film studios and the networks themselves.
So your channel mix has changed quite dramatically, I guess, over that time. But so has the way that you would access Xumo. So you've gone from being an app to, well, you explain where you are now.
Yeah. So in 2020, Xumo was acquired by Comcast, one of the largest cable companies in the US. In 2022, we became a joint venture between Comcast and Charter. And there's really 3 lines of business that are all fall under the Xumo name. One is Xumo Play, which is our direct-to-consumer sort of legacy fast app, which lives natively on our device footprint, but also on third parties, Roku, Amazon, etc. And then our device footprint, also named Xumo, Xumo Stream Boxes, Xumo TVs. We'll talk about that in a second. And then Xumo Enterprise, which Gary, you just mentioned, which is sort of born out of that idea that we can take the content, aggregate it, create channels, and then also have relationships with all the other platforms to be able to syndicate and sub-distribute the content channels. And on the device side, the Xumo Stream Box is the main device right now, which is the go-forward set-top box for Charter. So it is what customers are getting, whether they're broadband connected or they're video customers. They're getting a Xumo Stream Box, which brings all of their content together in one place. I think very similar to what you just heard Google talking about, a content forward, a content first OS to sort of really help customers find what they want to watch, when they want to watch it, and get them there quickly.
So are we then, if I'm in a Charter home or a Spectrum home, are we sort of seeing pay TV and fast on the same EPG? How does that sort of line up?
Yeah, so on the pay side, there is the Spectrum app, which is sort of natively built into the guide, and Xumo Play, our fast app, blend pretty seamlessly. And sort of there's a lot of user discovery and user personalization that happens to bring those channels forward. So if you're watching a fast channel, the next time you come in, there it is. If you're watching Midsummer, there it is the next time you come in. And so it makes access to the content seamless and easy, and you're not having to always remember, where was I watching this? How was I watching this? Where did I find it the last time?
But do we have a sort of channel lineup that literally has everything that you're subscribed to or have access to in one place?
Yes, and what you see across Comcast, our other parent, is that they're starting to blend native fast channels, and this taps into Xumo Enterprise, but native fast channels into the cable lineups. So pay TV sits alongside fast channels. For a customer, they just know they get more content.
Right.
And you start to see this blending of the two worlds.
And do you distinguish it in any way, or is it just sits alongside?
It is on X1 and Comcast. It does sit in a fast neighborhood,
Right.
But it's merchandised the same as you would merchandise pay channels. So hero units, marketing, etc. Whatever's editorially relevant, whether it's on a pay channel or in a fast channel, can find its way into the UI.
Wow. So, I mean, I guess that creates a world where you have access to quite a number of channels. So you're 350 for Xumo now, is that right?
For Xumo, we're 350. When we take those channels outside of the app, we tend to bundle them a little bit smaller. So Comcast is up to around 30 fast channels, adding more this year. That sort of bring content that a customer wouldn't necessarily get through a pay lineup to sit alongside that pay lineup. And then within Xumo Play, the fast application, which you're immersed in the world of fast, we have 350 channels.
Right. So does that mean you want more fast channels, or I mean, does it limit how many?
We have 350 channels, and my goal is 250 channels. So, discovery is the biggest obstacle in fast today, right? There's in the U.S. there's over 1,500 fast channels. I have a pipeline of 600 pitches for 600 different channels that want to come in, and more being added every day. And so the goal, though, is discovery and usage. And so what you see is platforms themselves, and the EPG is still limited. We talk about the EPG, and the remote being sort of antiquated technology. It's changing, and within our application, the EPG is personalized, and popular algorithms drive channels to the top of a genre.
Right.
We can day part across the U.S. so that we're both merchandising the appropriate channels at the appropriate times, but so that different regions are seeing the news at the appropriate time to see the news, and movies at the appropriate time to see movies. And so you start to see that taking shape,
right.
And that will continue into the future, because the goal is driving discovery. If you put 700 fast channels in a static lineup, inevitably partnerships are going to fail, because there just won't be enough share of voice to go around to monetize that. And at the end of the day, fast channels are partnerships because they're based on splitting the ad revenue.
Absolutely, but I guess what you're, without putting words into your mouth here, what you're saying is that even with the content discovery tools and the AI technology, you would prefer to have fewer quality channels than a massive roster of 700 or 800 channels.
Yeah, and that goes back to where we started this conversation with the evolution of the quality, and the quality wins over everything. It is one of the reasons you see a number of single series channels. If you have the Fifth Gear channel and you're a Fifth Gear fan, you look at that channel and you say, I bet if I click into this channel, I'm going to get an episode of Fifth Gear, and you're paid off every time.
Right.
And so And so it does help that discovery, which is why you see so many single series channels in an EPG, because it does the work of discovery for you. But what is happening, and you see it happening more each day, is just the quality of these channels and even the aggregated channels. So you take a partner like Lionsgate, the studio, with their channel MovieSphere. They're working on very short micro windows of, hey, this top tier movie licensed by this SVOD is going over to this SVOD, and there's a 1 day in between. We'll drop it into our fast channel for a day and monetize it, right?
Smart.
And so you start to see the studios and the networks pre-programming and scheduling these with the most premier content and starting to establish what I would say is the next lineup of linear channels, right? So that you end up with NBC News Now or ABC News Live in the US as two of the top news channels across any platform, pay or fast, because they have this name recognition, they have a quality behind it, and they're covering topical events.
So in that sort of pipeline that you've got of people sort of waiting or channels waiting, do you have a preference for single IP over aggregated, or
we have a preference for quality and people that are leaning into it? That the days of, hey, I collected some rights, what can we do with this? Are sort of over. And so what we do see now is this sort of leaning in, creating the sports channel, the news channel, the movie channel, the entertainment channel. Not to say there's not a place for single IP, there is, for those discovery purposes, and also because that brings out some of the best content.
Sure. So I mean, we've got a couple of minutes left. We've been on the journey so far with Xumo. What's next?
It is a lot of this sort of pushing forward the personalization, driving the engagement, driving the active users, and making these channels a daily habit.
Right.
Because after all, that's what sort of pay television in the US was, right? A daily habit. And this sort of lean back experience that you're not in the US paying $200 a month for is becoming as reliable as those pay channels. And so driving that forward, but delivering the content, as we started with the platform, driving those channels and putting them in front of the customer when they want it, how they want it, where they want it, and making the journey easy for discovery.
And I guess that makes it a little bit more appointment to view. I mean, so far, Fast has been in its own little bit of a ghetto and a sort of something that you go to and you might come back a few days later.
That's right. And what you're seeing is the quality of channels that are coming out are starting to do that, right? So live sports in the platform. We have the PGA Tour channel, and the PGA Tour, we started that channel with live rights for 26 events. Those rights have now gone behind the paywall with ESPN in the US, but they do a live show from the range that gets you ready for that content. And we see the sort of growth and engagement across this appointment viewing for these specific live events. So you start to see sports drive that. Obviously, it's an election year. So news is doing tremendously well, and there's a 24-hour news cycle in the US. So we're constantly driving spikes in press conferences, news events, et cetera. And so you start to see this becoming the entertainment and information stop for customers.
And are you starting to see any sort of sense of upsells? So you talked about sports going behind a paywall after they've been in Fast. Are people starting to do that more?
So that's the benefit of Xumo as a platform, right? We can carry the fast channels as a top of the funnel. I think Faz just talked about this, but as a top of the funnel kind of awareness driver. We have the applications, we have the pay channels, and you start to see this circulation and keeping people involved in the platform. And Fast does a tremendous job of bringing people in, and lots of times they never leave the Fast, right? It's there, it's their friend, and they're viewing. But other times it can sort of weave a customer journey.
Yeah. So I mean, we're hearing a lot of sort of messages coming through the day. You know, we had Virgin this morning and their journey in fast, and then how that ties up with pay. We had FAS before us, and you know, the whole sort of top of the funnel. So it's interesting just to see that, you know, across the world, it's very similar story, even if we're at different stages of evolution.
People like good content, and they want to be entertained and informed in an easy way, and that's what we're striving to do at Xumo.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stefan. We're out of time, but I really appreciate it. It's been a
Thank
great
you for
chat.
having me.
Thank you.